When you talk about certifications, certifications aren't magic bullets, right? They're check boxes. And they care more about your business and can it do the job than they do about your certification. So I want to tell people, whether you're a woman-owned small business or disadvantaged business or an American Indian economic enterprise, you need to do good business.
Welcome, everybody. You are now tuned in to the next episode of the Construction MF'ers podcast. I am 𝗙𝗵𝗄𝗃, the CEO and founder of Mobilization Funding. And today I have a very special guest with me. We're going to get back into government contracting. We're going to hit it from another side. We're going to talk about the procurement side. And I brought an expert on. His name is Marcus Streeter. Marcus, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Scott. Thank you.
Marcus is a procurement contractor, and really he's got extensive specialty in figuring out how to help contractors get into the government, procure their first contract, and really help them execute it. And that is what we're going to talk about today. But Marcus, before we do that, you got to tell me how you went from Goldman Sachs investment banking into government procurement, man. That's not your standard leap.
No, it's not. No, it's not at all. For me, I was in the military for 6.5 years, special warfare. I was a SWIC guy. And once I got out, I really wanted to get into finance. Like I was really big into, wanting to understand finance. So I ended up getting my master's at my bachelor's and my master's at DePaul in economic public policy analysis. And my first job out as an intern was with Goldman Sachs. They had a program called a veteran integration program that I was helping veterans go from service into banking. So it was a wonderful opportunity. I got to spend about 6.5 weeks in New York under this intense program, working, I don't know, somewhere around 60, 70 hours a week. It had to be somewhere around there. And then from there, you would get sent back to your feeder office. So your feeder office was wherever you came from. I happened to have come from Chicago at that time. So I went back and worked in the Chicago office right there on Wacker under Susan. I don't want to say her full name. Everyone who knows her in the Goldman Sachs finance world knows she's a super hard worker. And you know who she is if you've ever worked with her. So there I worked in two different aspects. I worked in their wealth management practice for about a year or two, and then from there I moved into their trade assistant. So that's when I was helping large prop trading firms kind of get access to exchange and being able to use margin and trade on margin. So that was kind of where I started in my finance journey. And then from there, I moved to a French bank called Société Générale, only because the work-life balance was better. Because anyone who worked at Goldman or you worked at B of A or in any of the big investment bank, BlackRock, any of those, you understand what that culture is like. And for me, I just needed a little bit better work-life balance. Good pay, I'm gonna tell you. You work there, you get paid, but the work-life balance is kind of what shoots you down. And then after that, COVID happened. COVID was a big change in the finance world. A lot of things were shuffling. A lot of acquisitions was happening around that time. Everybody was getting fined for fixing LIBOR rates. If you know anything about that in the government finance, in the finance world, it's a round robin of who gets caught fixing LIBOR rates at one point. And my bank got fined about $2.6 billion that they had to pay over a 5-year period. And obviously, you get fined $2.6 billion, you got to find $2.6 billion, and that never comes out of the CEO's pocket. No. So they started doing layoffs from that point. And then I found, so pretty much the journey from there is I started looking up, what was going to be my transition. They offered me a severance package. And I said, you know what, I'm going to take it. And now I got to find something else to do. I could go back into a bank. I applied to Bank of America, the CME exchange, the CBOE, which is Chicago Board, the Chicago Board of Exchange, so CBOE and CME. And then I found Eric Kofi. And Eric Kofi, which is where I met you, Scott, at the Delcon Giants Summit. I found him and I found his education platform. And I got really interested in government contracting because I knew working in the military that how procurement works. So I've had to get in the cash cage and do some purchasing of body armors, helicopters and stuff like that. I worked with contracting officers before. So I kind of understood it from the government and DoD buy side. but I didn't think about that, someone had to sell that stuff to us.
Yeah.
As a warfighter. And I was like, well, let me learn a bit more about that. So he did a full education process. He had a veteran grant at that time, which was sponsored by the Goodwill. So I signed up with the Goodwill, and I had some VA benefits left over. They was able to pay for the program for me. Went through that intense program of a lot of learning. And then I went out and became a consultant myself, and I got my first few clients. Helped them win, I think, my first 8 months, each of them, somewhere around like 1.1 million each. So I think there was a total of $3.5 million of contracts in my first full year of being a consultant. And just because I understood the process, took Eric's lessons, understanding, how to make the connections and meet the right people. And then from there, I went to get some assistance from my local PTAC office, or the Apex Accelerators as they're called now. And he said, man, you're more knowledgeable than most people that I speak with. What can I help you with? And I was like, well, I'm just trying to get into local contracting. That's, working with the state and the city. Being in the city of Chicago, they're a large procurement hub. And he was like, well, how about you come work with us? Could you do that? And I was like, I guess I could. And they offered me the job, and I've been there for about 7 months now. And that's pretty much my flow journey from, finance in the world of prop trading groups and exchange and working with Goldman and Société Générale into government contracting.
So talk to me about your clients. Like, you have such great experience across the board that you really can appeal. I noticed when we first met, I was like, wow, this is such an interesting dude. It's it's easy to speak. You're easy to speak to. You can appeal to a lot of folks. And I see you do a very good job at taking people and meeting them wherever they are in their government journey. If they're a senior person, sold a ton of things to the government, they're just trying to figure out the next level, you can meet them right where they're at. And if someone's never done it before, you meet them right where they're at. If it's somebody like me who's at a conference, like, you could explain to me really quickly what you do, where you're at, understand what I'm doing. And I think that's a really good gift that you have. And so talk to me about, who is your typical client? Like, who are you typically helping, so that we can kind of define that for everyone?
Okay, yes, absolutely. I mean, we get people from I have an idea for the government and I don't know how I should do it, all the way up into hey, I'm making 10 to 12 million dollars with the government. I want to increase that kind of portfolio. And actually most of my stuff is only with the Department of the Army. Most of my stuff is only with Army Corps of Engineers. You're talking big construction. Or I'm only doing work at the state level. How do I broaden that range of, broaden my client base basically in the government sphere? We have the full gambit. Like I said, I've helped people write cyber grants for, drone stuff. I'm working on that right now with the Department of Navy, cyber drone program. I'm helping a client do that. And then I got a client that's, hey, I'm trying to get my first contract. I need some bonding assistance. How do I get bonding? They're telling me I need a $1 million bond. I've never had to get a bond before. So, that's pretty much the gambit of our clients: IT, construction, like I said, drones. I mean, the list goes on. Hotels. That's an actual big government contractor that we have, a hotel group, helping the government find lodging. So we have some experience, especially in our office. My director's been there a lot longer than me, and then even with myself.
Yeah. Now, as consultants, for example, like, if I'm a government contractor and I'm working with a contracting officer, and I've executed some contracts, I'm winning some awards, I'm filling out RFPs. And now I'm like, you know what? I want to get to a consultant. I need this help. But yet I say to myself, I don't know, what's a consultant going to do for me? Like, what is that? Like, how do I answer that? Do you fill out the contracts? Do you talk to the contracting officers? Do you show me what to do? Like, what is the services for that type of person? Because I think that's where a lot of folks, at least listening to our podcast or in our network, they probably are already contracting with the government, and maybe they're trying to, but I can hear them in their head, like, why do I need a consultant? Like, what are they going to do for me? Type of thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that definitely. So a good consultant wants to know what their client needs, right? So what we'll do is it's fact finding, because for one client, I can be a proposal writer or or a team builder where they go, I want to do something different. I need a whole different team for that, which you will need. Helping you find admin. We can get all the way to the point, maybe you want us to do some, what we call in the business, capture management, right? That's doing the research behind how do I develop new relationships? Who do I develop those new relationships with? And how do I go about, making those relationships turn into dollar value? So when you're looking at a consultant, I tell all of our small businesses, whether you're going to us or you're going to a private consultant or anyone else, you really want to know either where you want them, where you want to put your consultant, or your consultant, if they're good enough, they'll kind of listen to you and figure out which problem they can help you solve.
So in my experience, I see people engage with the government and they either become very good at it and very successful, or they quickly fail and they're out, whether they want to be or not. What's I guess first, would you agree with that? Is that your experience as well?
That is 100%. I was just dealing with a client all this week. They're doing their first prime contract submittal. And they've been working with the government for 20 years, mainly as a subcontractor. They say, hey, look, we tried this at the prime once and no, thank you. Like, we didn't get it. We don't understand how anyone becomes a prime, because we've been doing it for so long. So we like where we are in our process. And I help them understand what it takes to be a prime contractor. I mean, you worked as a sub. So I see a lot of people get discouraged very easily because you're doing things, I always say, haphazardly, right? I mean, even my mentor, 𝗙𝗿𝗀𝗵 would talk, you need to focus yourself in terms of what kind of business you're trying to procure. You need to have actual goals. I try to help my clients set actual goals, whether that's dollar value, whether that's contract actions. You need to set a goal on what you need and then focus in on who can actually fulfill that goal. Because not every office can fulfill that goal. I just did it with a client the other day. Her number one client is the Forest Park Service. She would have never thought that if she didn't learn how to focus what she actually wanted to do and then create goals for herself. She was trying to go after everyone else. And I said, well, based on the procurement history of your area, the Forest Park Services buy your services the most in terms of actual contract actions. It was like 76 a year. And I was like, you keep trying to go after this one, Department of Defense contract, and that's a huge contractor. That's something that you don't want to do. So people get burned out just because they don't understand that the government is a big thing. It was like, if someone said, hey, I want to get into the finance, you're like, okay, mezzanine finance, leverage capital. We're like, what are you trying to do? Like, there's so many areas in that. I think of it the same thing with government contracting. That's a big, broad statement. What do you want to do? Who do you want to work with? Everyone isn't your best client.
So is there a few traits or common mistakes that people make that either are the difference between they fail fast or they become wildly successful?
Yes, I would say that the two common things, I would say, one is perseverance, and then two is direction. If you have the right direction and the right perseverance, you will absolutely become a great government contractor in your space or field. Now, you got to understand the government is a buyer. They don't buy everything. And if it's a brand new idea, you have to introduce them to the idea. And that's a different path.
Yeah. So, I think, for example, like going back to the original question, like, what could you do? How do you help them? I think you help them be disciplined and persevere, but yet find what thing to focus on so you can be disciplined in focusing on that and then persevere through the process. And I would add one thing that we see, which I would agree with you on that. And I think what I'm about to say is probably fits in line with one of those, but it's the paperwork aspect. Like, there is a very specific process you have to follow to either get an award, present yourself, be paid, invoice proper. And I think a lot of people hear that the government takes a long time to pay, but actually I always tell them they don't. Actually, they pay a lot faster. Now, most people those government receivables might age much longer than the other ones they have on their accounts receivable, but it's not the government's fault. It's because they haven't filled them out properly, and that extenuating circumstance of those numbers because something didn't get filled out, didn't get dispersed, or didn't get submitted on time. The clock switched, but there's a lot faster payments in the government than there are certainly in the private markets, in my opinion, particularly in construction, manufacturing, and delivered goods and services.
Yes, I agree. And that's the number. That's probably one part of my checklist is I always ask my clients, what kind of admin do you have that A $200,000 private job is different than a $200,000 government job just because of the paperwork intensity that you're going to have to do. There's a lot of admin that goes behind it. So if you're not prepared, I always tell people, if you're a solopreneur, the government might not be your best first client, or maybe your best first 5 clients, because you will need to learn how to do their paperwork in a certain way, from proposal writing, as you just said, Scott, all the way to invoicing. That, you know, that not everyone just doesn't take an email invoice, have whole systems for invoicing. You need to know how to work those.
Yeah, I mean, a $1,000 invoice to the government missing question number 10, or you missed checking the box to question and a specific, or to answer a specific question, or $1 million invoice with the same act, that doesn't matter. 1,000 or 1 million, not going out the door. Check the box right, 1,000,000 or 1,000 comes in your door. It's literally that simple sometimes. And knowing that, I think, is key. So that's good. Perseverance, discipline, and admin. Those are the 3 real key. And of course, with discipline and perseverance comes focus. In the discipline category, I think it's focus and goals. So you know what you want to do, how you want to do it, and what your plan is to deliver that to the government. And then those other 3 things. Right there exists the secret to succeeding or failing with government contracting. I couldn't agree with you more, by the way. By the way, those are probably 3 good things for life in anything you want to do.
Realistically, yeah.
But government contracting will shine those spotlights on those 3 items more than a private or commercial job any day of the week. Yeah, you just can't. There's no ambiguity.
Exactly.
So let's switch gears for a second. How important is it to be a strategic sourcing supplier versus maybe a commodity supplier to the government?
Kind of elucidate on that a little bit for me. Like what
So I think, like, sometimes people try to sell, like, I think you led to it. Sometimes people try to sell new stuff to the government. Or you could be the person that sells Band-Aids to the government, right? Like, you know, and like and maybe touch a little bit on price, margin, cost. Like, does the government pay more for items? They pay less? Like, is it like the bidding process? Like, if someone's trying to focus on what they're going to sell to the government, if it's a product, but I'm really thinking more services or construction, should they try to be very strategic in what type of project and the scope of work, or should they just be specific to the scope of work and kind of jump on anything, any type of project? The size of the project matter? Department? I mean, when I say strategic sourcing, I mean more like sometimes the government's looking for something real specific.
Yes.
But the majority of the time, the government's buying the same stuff everybody else is buying. They just have a process for it. So what's the difference, I guess? And that's kind of what I mean on those 2 things.
Okay, yeah. I mean, so anything that's a new requirement, you have to understand, if the government hasn't bought it before, there's going to be an intensive learning process for the government. And if you're not willing to teach, you're not, that procurement strategy isn't going to be good for you, whether it's a product or a service. If I mean, AI is a big one. Drones have been a big one in terms of, even if it's a product you're trying to sell it to them, you're gonna have to teach them along the way. So there's very specific, I mean, I guess you can call them SKUs, but they're really national product codes, so NPCs. They have a very particular buy box, and if your thing doesn't fit the buy box, it can even be something like a tire. I had a friend who's a tire consultant. And you know, very similar tires, same weight, same rubber band, but the NPC number was just different. So he has to go tell the government, hey, that tire doesn't exist anymore. Actually, they don't even make that. These are the tires that they have. So you're gonna have to change that number, or this is a like product. Same thing with services. If you're building something, we had a client trying to sell the government laser cleaning for their ships, for the Navy. And it's like, yeah, that sounds good. But they're like, we normally scrape and paint it, and it costs us $200,000. I don't know if I want to pay $1 million for a laser, right? So that's going to be a different process. So when you're being strategic, you can be, whether it's something new, whether it's something old. I mean, if there's something that they're already selling, like you said, Band-Aids, in terms of margin, margin's going to be scale, right? So you're going to make your margins on the scale. You're going to, you know, $1 million. I mean, a million Band-Aid purchase is different than a 10,000 Band-Aid purchase from the Bureau of Prisons versus the Defense Logistics Agency. They're going to buy 1 million Band-Aids at once, right? So you'll need to figure out strategically which one's better for you in terms of, you know, what your inventory capacity is. But I would also say, you know, as you're being, you know, doing strategic sourcing, I go back to what I said. who's buying it, when they buying it, and how they buying it. That's more important to me if you're new or you're trying to grow your government business than anything else. Because anyone who does concrete, right? I'm going to tell you right now, your number one client is going to be the Army Corps of Engineers, right? But that's because they buy so much concrete, doing bridges and dams and everything else that the Army Corps of Engineers does. But they've clearly been buying it from someone for at least 100+ years. So, you know, how do you strategically become the new supplier? That's when you need to figure out who, when, and how they're buying.
Yeah.
Because you might not even be competitive, and there's no need to get into that sourcing of business if you're like, well, I got this kind of PCI concrete, but it's innovative, but that's not what the government wants.
Right.
The government wants concrete that's already bought.
Right. They want what they know to be true and work. Now they're interested in learning about something new, but maybe not for the project that's about to come out of the ground that they've already designed.
Exactly. That's not a time to introduce your brand new product to the government when they're like, oh, we trying to buy $20 million on concrete. Like, I got this new concrete. No, not the time. Not the time.
So let's say you meet a new client.
Mm-hmm.
They do a few different things well in the construction realm or other, and you're trying to narrow down like where to start. Like, what process do you follow with that client to figure out what product or service should they try to engage the government with first?
Mm-hmm.
In what size and capacity, at what price? Like, what's the process you go through? I'm a new client. I come to you, hire you, and I'm like, here's the things I do, Marcus.
Mm-hmm.
What do you ask me? What process do you go through for me to be able to figure out how you can best help me be successful in delivering a product or service that I already do?
Well, yes. So first and foremost, we gotta develop as Eric coined, a target market list, right? We got to figure out a target market list for everything you do well. So if you do roofing, you do HVAC, you do steel cast building construction, bridge work, we're going to say, okay, so here are the 5 things you do well. We have to develop understanding how the government procures that particular thing, and that you do well. And then we start to say, okay, so here is the common project size for this in this area that you want to work in. So which direction do you want to go? So here's 5 things that the government procures that you do particularly well. Here's how often they do it. Here's a dollar value in which they do it in. How do you want to proceed? That's kind of how I do it. So that's why I said you got to give me your goals. Some people may say, hey, a $250,000 project doesn't move the needle for me. Yeah. I don't want to start that small. And I go, okay, so 250 and above is over the SAP limit. So you're going to be in a different competition level as a smaller business. So you're going to be competing with the 𝗙𝗿𝗀𝗃𝗃s and the Suffolks and the Walshes and the Power Constructions and the you name large construction company in the state. That's who you're competing with over $250,000.
Yeah.
Period. Just no one didn't know that. I'm gonna tell you that right now. That's who you're competing with on anything over $250,000. Under $250,000, the government's mandated to give it to a small business. Above that, they do what they want. So now I go, okay, now your competition is going to be different. Now you got to see if this is an area that they play in and how often they play in it by looking at the data. You can always look at data. I know people don't like data, but it really tells you kind of what your strategy should be. So that's kind of how I enter with the client. You come and sit with us. I tell you, okay, so here's what you do well. Here's your target market list for that. Here's your top 10 competitors in that. I like to do that too, because I always tell people your competition is your partners. They're not always competing with you. They might look and say, you know what, I don't have the manpower or time to do that. I'll work with you on that. Put a couple of my PMs on, and I'll source it with you. So I always tell people, look at partnering as a strategic part of your acquisition plan.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I develop, working with a client and strategy.
So talk to me about the role of the contracting officer. I think a lot of times clients are either nervous, they don't know how to handle the contracting officer. They may or may not know the exact amount of power or role of that contracting officer has. So talk about the contracting officer, and then if any role you have in helping work with that contracting officer after they would win an award or while they're bidding.
Okay, yeah. I mean, the contracting officer is the person that signs the check. So in any if you look into your own business, who pays the invoices, right? But who pays the invoices doesn't know that much about the work. So some people really get into this fit with the contracting officer, like, well, I'm trying to explain to them why my product's better. That's not what they do. That's the COR, that's the representative, that's the stakeholder, the person on the ground when you do your site visits. That's the person that knows the most about the need. The contracting officer is the person that signs the checks, right? So developing that relationship is all about telling them how well you can do the job for the budget. That's the only thing you need to really explain to developing a relationship with the contracting officer on the front end. There's not many questions they can answer legally by FAR standards on, what's your budget? What are you looking for? They can't answer that kind of stuff. That stuff is in the FAR. If you don't want to read the FAR, I always tell people, throw it in ChatGPT and ask it a question. Throw the whole FAR in there and ask it a question. Can they answer pricing? The answer is going to be no.
That's a great suggestion. I mean, if you want to find one way to use ChatGPT, that might not be a bad one. All right, I'll give you that.
I tell people that. Just take a whole volume, throw it in there, but put it in. You're going to need the paid version. You're going to need 4.0, and then ask it a question. And it will answer the question with the source data that it gave it to you. So just in case you're ever, I'll tell people, don't read the FAR. You don't have to be an expert like I try to be, but find sources and ways to answer your questions. And one of them with contracting officers, they can't answer certain things, and budget and pricing is one of them. So your relationship with them needs to be, I can do the job at a reasonable price, right? So everything is lowest technical acceptable price. The technical acceptable price is really the really big one for them. So when you're developing a relationship with contracting officers, your whole thing needs to be, I can do the job on time and on budget, because that's what they get worried about. That's what they get graded on. When they go to their superiors and they're looking for accommodation letters and things of that nature, which is another strategy I teach my clients, when they're looking for promotions, their numbers that they're trying to hit is how many contracts did you put out on time, on budget, out the door.
Yeah.
So that's
how
that relationship works.
On our show, we had an expert on contracting with the government and the relationship to labor wages, Davis-Bacon Wage Act, talked a lot about different regulations. Jim Campbell's name, and he owns a company called Axum. And he was explaining some of these regulations around these and how important and critical they are, and how really a lot of contractors can really suffer and lose big time if they don't properly account for not only the labor wage, but also the fringe benefits that are associated to it. And can you talk a little bit about that in your experience, what is that and why is that so much different than working in the regular private markets?
Oh, yes, absolutely. There's the Department of Labor puts out, the standard wages for every county in the United States, whether it's Barnstable, Massachusetts, down to Auburn, Alabama, right? There's a certain ways that you need to pay a certain particular worker with its own fringe benefits, because certain areas might have a union. I mentioned Massachusetts because I know they're a heavy union, and Alabama is not. So what you pay a steel worker or what you pay a carpenter is going to be completely different on those two contracts. So you can't just say, I pay my carpenter $80 an hour. And it's like, well, he gets 80 and he gets fringe benefits in Massachusetts that you have to account for. So, Jim is right. You gotta know these rules and regulations. And I always tell people, outsource it. If you don't want to learn them yourself, you're going to have to find someone like a Jim, like me, like someone else who understands that. And if you're not ready to outsource that kind of stuff, because obviously I'm sure Jim doesn't do what he does for free. If you're not willing or able to outsource that kind of thing, then you're going to have to find ways to kind of mitigate that part of your contract of, hey, I don't have the cost to learn this stuff. Maybe I would, and I always tell people, well, if you don't have the cost to learn it, do something else. But let's find something that doesn't have Davis-Bacon, that doesn't have you have to worry about fringe benefits, and they're normally smaller contracts.
Yeah. So Marcus, how does someone find you if they want to work with you? How do they get connected with you?
Oh yeah, so if you ever want to get connected with our Apex Accelerator office, you can always email me. I do all my appointments through Zoom. If you want to work with me outside of the office, you can always send me an email or give me a phone call. I will definitely put my contact information with you, Scott, and anyone who wants to reach out to me, please do. I mean, even if you just want to meet with me for 30 minutes to, kind of understand what Apex and PTAC can do for you. What I can do for you, how I can help you, and then, going further down the road and helping you build your procurement team. We can definitely do that. So I can always give my contact information. We put it in the show notes. We can, you can blast it out to your network. I have no problem helping and working with anyone.
And we'll put it in the show notes so everyone can contact you as well, all your contact. But like, can anyone in any state work with you, or do they have to be in Illinois?
So if they're in Illinois, you're going to have to go through my office, through my Apex office. If it's outside of Illinois, I can offer some assistance, but I have more expertise in my area. Now, I've done consulting in many other states, so Connecticut, Massachusetts, Texas, Arizona, Florida. So I have experience with, being able to help you and point you in the right direction. If I can't help you myself, because I'm always a person, I'll do what I can and then pass you off to someone who could do better.
And I think one thing would be great too, to let people know, is in March, you have a one-day seminar coming up.
Yes,
where folks can come, learn all about it, meet 150 plus different companies.
Yes.
Mark's going to talk a little bit about the Apex Accelerator kind of summit conference you have coming up.
Oh yeah, so we have the Illinois Apex Accelerators. There's 9 centers based out of Illinois, and we're joining with our diversity inclusion office, and we're hosting a government contracting summit. So there we plan on having at least 150 to 200 different businesses, along with federal, local agencies, and then other partners that can kind of help you understand the government process. That's from proposal writing to grant writing to getting bonding, getting financing. So our goal is to kind of introduce to people who we are and what we do and how we can help. So that's going to be March 19th of 2024. That's coming up here in about a month, and we're super excited. This will be our first one doing it. We're being really ambitious, and we're hoping to make this an annual thing. We'll kind of see how it works out.
Nice.
But so that's pretty much the summit and the event.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I think this I'm going to find a lot of value there. It's just hard to figure out. Like, you want to get into the government contracting, you want to sell things to government. They're the largest corporation in the world, buys more stuff than anyone else on the planet, and figuring out how to work with them can be a challenge. And I think, like, just humbling yourself, going to a conference like this in a great way to learn some information and see and find you or your group or someone like you that can help them fix the problem they have before they get into the government, or while they're in the government, show them how to be even more successful. I think that's just so critical to accomplishing it. This is one of those places in the business world where doing it on your own doesn't necessarily make the most sense.
No, not at all.
Yeah, you're still doing it on your own, but just put a little wind at your back. At least point yourself in the right direction. You don't need to be spinning around in circles.
Exactly. You got to build a strong team. And I tell people, government contract is based on the 3 R's. It's rules, regulations, and relationships. So you got to figure out which one of your specialties is going to be. After that, you'll be a very successful contractor. Yeah. To understand those.
And let's talk a little bit about one last thing. I almost passed up on this, but I think it's important to bring up. The government has rules and regulations where they spend money, how they're going to spend the money, who they're going to spend it with. Does that mean that you're automatically going to get it and you don't have to do all these other things before you get paid?
I mean, you got to understand them. So anytime you see a contract, every single contract has what's called the certs and reps. So it's certifications and representations. In there, you're saying that you understand the rules. And in there, they list every rule that applies to that contract. There's some of them that are standard, they're always going to be the same. And then the other ones you're going to have to know and understand. One of those is Davis-Bacon. It's always going to be in there. So if you don't understand the rules, you can't come later and say, well, now that I won a contract, I didn't know that I had a limitation on subcontract. I didn't know I had to, do Davis-Bacon. I didn't know I had to tell you my top 3 paid executives. Well, you signed it when you signed that contract. That's why they put it in there. So there's one of those things where, like I said, you really just want to know what the rules are and make sure that you're playing by them, and then you'll be fine. You'll be successful.
Right. And I would try to tell people this: just because you have a small business certification doesn't mean you're exempt from those rules. They're going to hold you
No.
to the same rules and standards as they are the big boys.
Believe it or not, you got more rules. You got more rules when you,
That's
when
right.
you got the certification.
Yep. And you can clean up and you can do really well in the small business community gaining government contracts for all the reasons and incentives they put out there. But it doesn't mean you don't have to do everything that you need to do. And that means like dotting those I's, crossing those T's, even more scrutiny. That's why I think it's so important. There's more scrutiny on the contracts that are set up, set aside for the small business community than there is even on the bigger contracts. Way more.
Absolutely.
And that's also where the majority of the fraud in the government is too. So you're going to have more eyes on you, and you just have to know that you're getting into the water, which is very good and can be amazing. And the programs there are fantastic, but you better have your life raft and your swimmies and your rowboat and your extra motor. And you're going to have a lot of boxes to check. And I think it's just critical, because I think a lot of people just go in there thinking the government's here to give me this contract and they're set up to make me successful. And that's true. But they are not set up to make sure you're profitable.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. God, I couldn't agree with you more. Like if I could hit a like button on that comment, I would. That was absolutely...
maybe we'll pull that clip out right there, and then we'll make sure that we have we put a like button next to it. That'll be the one we use for the teaser video.
Yeah.
That's funny. So one of my favorite questions to ask, we've talked about a lot of things, but what question or thing should I have asked you about that I didn't touch on?
Well, one thing I could definitely say, something that I would want to touch on, especially for small businesses, is is like when you talked about certifications. Certifications aren't magic bullets, right? They're check boxes, and they care more about your business and can it do the job than they do about your certification. So I want to tell people, whether you're a woman-owned small business or disadvantaged business or an American Indian economic enterprise, you need to do good business. Then your good business with that checkbox can be a magic bullet for your business.
Yeah, I mean, now that I would hit a like button for. That is very well said. And I can attest that that's 100% true, by the way, too. I've seen it hundreds of times.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we hear it all the time. Should I get this certification? Maybe you should concentrate more on, can you do the work? And then we'll worry about your certification.
Performance is the most important thing.
Yes.
More important than price.
Performance
is key. Yeah.
Yes.
And building
the government
a
will pay
reputation.
extra. Yeah, they'll pay extra for good work.
Pay extra for good work, and performance is the most significant way to set yourself apart from the competition inside the government program. There's lots of people failing. There's lots of people performing, but getting yourself as a reputation of like a performer, even if you're a performer at the highest price, you're going to win a lot of awards, Yeah. Particularly in the small business community.
Yes. Because you're making people look good, and that's what they like.
Bingo. That's right. Well, man, this has been an awesome episode. I appreciate you giving so much of your insight, time, these nuggets, man. I mean, I hope everybody grabbed onto even 2, 3 of the 10 that you put out here today, and give you a shot to call, let you know where you're at. Let them help you, allow you to help them.
Yes. Yeah. Let me help you, but at the end of the day, you got to have something to help. That's what I tell you.
Hey, give Marcus a shot. Give him a call. Check out the conference if you can get to Chicago on March 19th, right?
March 19th. Yes, Tuesday, March 19th.
In Chicago, one day. Get up there if you can. If not, click on the show notes. You can see all the ways to contact Marcus and his team. And he's doing great stuff, and he's helping people a lot, and I appreciate it. And by the way, you're also cool, dude. Easy to talk to. It's not. That's a trait. That's a great trait all by itself, man.
Yeah, thanks. I try.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. I wish you all the best, and God bless you. Take care.